Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. Clean drinking water used to be a given, but now it is one of our state's most pressing policy debates. And it's the issue that drew our guest today into the public arena and now towards a run for Congress. State Rep Mindy Messmer joins us, State Rep of Rye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. So you've been a leading voice calling for the remediation of the Coakley landfill. It's a Superfund site, drawing attention to the cancer cluster there on the seacoast.
Right.
We had just had EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt on this program last week, and he was saying things that people would probably like to hear about Coakley landfill. Let's clean it up. But you're skeptical about what he was saying. Why is that?
The path that EPA is taking right now is a delay path, in my opinion, taking another 2 to 5 years minimum to complete some investigation that they want to have done, where back in 1994 there was already a plan set forward to actually remediate and then have a phased approach for that remediation, so that gathering this additional information should not stop that progress right now. And that's one of the things, one of my bills is attempting to do right now in the State House, is to outline where the state of New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services already has the authority to move forward on that, to stop the flow of contamination into our surface water bodies and ultimately our drinking water issue.
This is pretty much your issue. You own this one. At the State House, if the Democrats take over in November, you're well positioned to advance the ball on a number of fronts here, and yet your sights are set on Washington. Why is that? Why make that jump rather than focusing on your agenda here?
Right. Well, when Carol Street Porter said she was going to retire, I sort of looked at myself and compared myself to her in 2006 and thought, well, she at the time was a social worker, a largely unknown person for this situation. I am fairly well known now in the district for having done the sorts of activism you're talking about. Scientists, and we are in dire need of scientists now in Congress. We only have one scientist in Congress who says he's lonely up there in Congress, so I'd like to go help them. And we're facing some really pressing issues across the country now. There are maybe 625 bases like Pease Air Force Base where drinking water is threatened by these perfluorochemicals, and that's one of the issues that I think I'm well suited to sort of take on. It's a complex issue. It's a far-reaching issue potentially across the country, and it requires some really measured thought to figuring out how to solve the problem.
Another issue at the top of the headlines right now, gun control. Do you think that people should be allowed to own AR-15 assault-style rifles?
Well, I grew up in upstate rural New York and sort of a gun culture, so I'm familiar with guns. And I don't think that it's common sense that people should be able to have those sorts of automatic rifles and multiple magazines at their disposal. You don't need that for target practice. And we also know that back in 1996, the CDC was basically outlawed from doing any sort of scientific analysis of how to solve this issue with these mass shootings. And I think that that's something a scientist like me can go and help get some funding back in place, look at good ways to develop some evidence-based approaches to solve this problem. I'm so supportive of the young people who have stepped up now to really talk about these issues. I've heard from many students in the last week about how concerned they are about these issues, and I'm so proud of them that they stepped up. And I feel badly that they suffered some backlash over that too. But
this issue is increasingly being seen in moral terms. How do you convince a law-abiding, good citizen gun owner that AR-15 that they own, that it's wrong to own that?
I think, it takes showing people and discussing with them and educating them on what is going on. And that's the kind of thing I've done in the State House, is I've educated people on the water issue. When I came to the State House, there was most people didn't understand many of the issues. Just yesterday, just this past week, Representative Jackie Silly heard some testimony concerning one of my bills, which is meant to lower the arsenic level in the state, because we know that it causes bladder cancer. We know that there's a high rate of bladder cancer in our state. And I could see the epiphany on her face when she realized that unless there are scientists involved in policy making to make mandates for the government to follow through on addressing some of these public health issues, they don't do it. So it's really important to have scientists involved in doing these things. And that has come mostly because I've educated a lot of people in the State House, everywhere up through the top levels of the Senate, about how important it is, and the governor as well. I've met with him and talked with him about these issues, and it's important to educate these people and help them understand how important it is, and that's similar to the other issue you were talking about.
Another issue with a state-federal nexus is the opioid crisis.
Absolutely.
Right now, we're seeing, with Hope for New Hampshire Recovery retracting from its sort of statewide footprint. Also, we're seeing Harbor Homes in Nashua, which has been administering the Safe Stations program there. It's seeing some financial shortfalls. What's going on right now with our front lines of the opioid crisis with these organizations that seem to be in crisis themselves?
They're suffering because there is such a huge a number of opioid-related cases. I looked at the state data this week, and it's on an upwards. It's even higher this year so far in 2017 than it was last year. So it's obviously not getting better. So we need to really look at ways to help this crisis through. We need to put some money into those centers. We need to support them. We need to support doctors. There are a lot of policy issues we probably need to look at. We need some evidence to look at whether or not the distributors are being responsible that are distributing these medications. We need to look at how they're getting into our state. We need to look at I've heard that there's Chinese copycats coming in through Canada. We need to look at those. So it's a multifaceted issue. There's not going to be one easy solution to this issue, and this is the kind of issue that I would like to work on in Washington as well. I think you need to, as scientists, we develop a team. If we don't know something, we develop teams of experts to develop the science, to develop, get the data that we need to provide the evidence to solve these kind of complex issues, and that's the kind of thing that I want to do to help out with.
If you get elected, the team that you would be on there in Congress would be nominally led by Nancy Pelosi. Would you support her for another term as Speaker if you get elected? I
would support, as Democrats, we need to work together. We need to not draw lines between us, and we need to all work together and solve these complex issues.
But do you think Democrats need a change at the top there? I mean, obviously, while her tenure was brief as Speaker, there are some people who would like to see new leadership in Congress among the Democrats.
Well, I'm a very progressive person in general. I think I am not afraid to speak up about what I think is right and wrong. So I think I would take that same approach in Washington. So if I have differences of opinion, I probably would make them known.
The minority leader referred to the tax cut as providing just crumbs to people of middle and lower income. Is that insulting, I guess, to people of lower and middle income? And is it a bad thing that people got that money back?
I think it's a good temporary solution. I think it's temporary. Those sunset, as you probably know. But I think as a country, we need to sort of reevaluate where we put our money and really put our money where we think where we're talking about issues, but we need to really put that money in where those issues need to be solved. For instance, the $1.65 billion or $165 billion extra that we put into the military-industrial complex in the last budget revision, is that really where we should be putting our money? Should we be putting our money into solving issues around the opioid crisis across the country and these water issues that we are seeing crop up now across the country? I think we really need to put our priorities, put the money where the priorities are.
Mm-hmm. Money in this race, you've got, I think, 7 candidates or 6 or 7 candidates right now. Who knows? It's a kind of a moving target these days. The fundraising here is kind of interesting in that some candidates are lagging a little farther behind. You would be one of them. And then there's a candidate who's here who just moved to the state who's got about $500,000 in the bank. Does that money make a difference? And how do you see your path to victory sort of in a lane where you're dealing with less money, essentially?
Right. Well, I'm focusing on my campaign. I'm focusing on getting the word out. I have a huge base of volunteers, and every time I go out to talk to people, that base increases a lot. So that's what I'm focusing on, getting the messaging out. The money will come. The money is coming. I look at myself back in and compare myself to 2006. The first quarter that Carol Shea Porter raised less than half of what I've raised in the first quarter, and I had a month and a half, and she had a full quarter. So I look at that and say she was successful. It shouldn't be all about money. We need to get the money out of politics, the influence. I see the influence on politics and policymaking every day in the State House. There were 7 lobbyists flown in to fight my bill to eliminate crumb rubber on playgrounds in New Hampshire, and those were the tire manufacturing industry and the rubber manufacturing industry. So, I think that influence of money in politics needs to be addressed. And I think that it should be more about the people and what the people want, and those are the people that are voting, and those are the people I'm paying attention to.
You were a Bernie Sanders supporter in 2016, and now we're hearing some rumblings that his son, Levi Sanders, who lives in Claremont, might want to run in the 1st Congressional District, which is obviously perhaps about as far away as you can get, Claremont in the 1st CD. Is that a problem that he doesn't live in the district and he wants to run for Congress?
Well, I think it's interesting. I met with him back in August, and at that time we were all talking about him running for executive council, which I think, so I'm kind of surprised about this change. But I think it's important to be an activist and a community worker in your community. That's what I do, and I think that that's what people really want, and I think that's what people respect, and that's why I'm seeing such huge volunteer support in our community, in our district. So,
one more federal issue I wanted to touch on is immigration. There's this deal that's sort of been out there, and both sides have sort of been working around how to get to this in terms of the president wants a wall on the southern border, and Democrats would like to see citizenship or a path to citizenship for the DACA recipients. Is that a deal that you would make, essentially? Allow funding for a more robust wall on the southern border in order to provide that pathway to citizenship?
I think building a wall is probably back to the Roman era. That would have been more effective than it is now. I think, now it's probably not an effective way to deal with any situation like that. And I think, we're a country that's built on people that came here. My forefathers, yours probably, came here, and they made this their home, and they were able to achieve the American way by working hard. And that's what I would like to be able to still provide for our families. I know our families are $400 away many times from, going bankrupt if there's a serious medical illness in their family. And they're working hard. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. We need to make sure that people have a livable wage that they can live on, and not have to work so hard that they can't spend time with their families and their children. So I think that we need to get our priorities straight. We need to put money into helping people achieve that American dream still, and work hard, and not be, that's why I'm a big proponent of Medicare for All, because I think everyone in this country deserves the right to a high quality, cost-effective health care system. We spend a ton of money on health care. We spend some of the highest amounts of money in the world on health care, and there's no reason why we can't provide that for our citizens. And I think that would spur economic growth. I think it would spur innovation. People wouldn't feel tied to the jobs that they have because of the corporations that provide them with health care. I'm a small business owner. I know how hard it is to be able to provide health care, affordable health care, to people that are talented that you want to attract. And I think that, if we give them Medicare for All, if we give them a path to having a real reliable health care system, they can move on to do some of the innovative things that we've seen in the past.
All right. State Rep Mindy Messmer, we'll see you at the State House and out on the campaign trail.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate your time.